Hi, my name is Sai. Welcome to my video channel called Nugget of Wisdom. The inspiration for this video um, relates to what I've saw in the last couple of days, and that is something very unusual. Government officials, mainstream media, senior members of the military in the UK talking about conscripting people into the army. When I saw it, I found it hard to believe. I thought, are they serious? For me, conscription would really be necessary if the country was under attack, potentially under attack. Like we saw in the Second World War, where people really were there ready to protect and fight for their loved ones, for the vulnerable, for their families and so on, for survival. And I just thought, how are they going to convince the public in the UK that we're currently in that world? And then I thought to myself, well, what would you want? What information would I want if I was to support or convince my children, my sons, to get into a war or to be part of a war myself? And then I thought, well, this is an amazing country. I love living here. I love the people here. It's a beautiful place. If it was under threat, I'd find it difficult, yes, having to get involved in the military, but I would do it. I'd say, okay, it's important, and I'll do it. So from the point of view of motivating myself, I would sacrifice myself in order to protect what we have here, which is amazing. But I would only want to do that once I knew exactly why I was supposed to be doing it. What was the justification behind it all? And so, as a sort of thought experiment, I said, okay, well, let's look at the potential justification for going to war today. And then I also thought, I meet so many people all the time who you can tell have got anxiety and frustration and sometimes disbelief and curiosity about what's really going on. There are these wars starting to happen, and you've got the Ukraine thing, and you've got the Israel thing, and the Gaza thing, and basically that something doesn't feel right. Who do you believe? Who do you trust? Where is the genuine information that we need to understand what's going on? Because I think when you have that information, then you can make decisions about whether you want to go to war, or whether you want to endorse forcing your children to serve in the military. And so I've done a lot of investigation on this because I'm interested in it. And what's interesting for me is that I've seen lots and lots of articles and news reports and all this stuff, all these wars, the Ukrainian situation and the Israeli situation, and it's very hard to get any kind of truth, because part of these wars, a tool of these wars, is propaganda. So the governments and the military organizations use propaganda to get the people in those countries to buy into what they're doing, so they can go off and they can buy weaponry and export weaponry and go into battle. And this happens everywhere, in every country that's involved in war. And this notion that you see in these news blogs and news reports that there's a wrong and there's a right and there are moral people and so on, it's just not, unfortunately, it's just not the case. It's a ruthless world where people will do ruthless things and they will lie because they see to them the greater good. The greater good is about winning the war. It's about protecting their moral stance, their values, and convincing the public that the other side is the bad side. But the problem today is with media and everything else, there's so much of it that it's very difficult for people to actually find out what the truth is. So I have looked at this, and I have looked at some really interesting people. I had a long list, but I whittled it down because I wanted to make sure that the people that I was kind of recommending here to get some handle and some idea of what's going on were as reputable as possible. And so one of these people is a guy called Professor John Mearsheimer, and he's a political analyst who served in the US Air Force. And he's very critical of the West when it comes to what's going on in Ukraine and what's going on in Gaza. But he's an American, He's a patriot, he's an academic, and he's served in the military. So he's a very interesting guy. He doesn't take a tribal approach. He just takes a very factual, kind of technical approach to what's going on. So he's interesting and very good guy to have, and I'll put a link to him on my video. Second guy is Jeffrey Sachs, another American professor, economist, in a similar vein to Mr. Mearsheimer, but a different perspective, looking at humanitarian and economic perspectives. Then you've also got Ray Dalio. And Ray Dalio is a US investor and one of the biggest hedge fund managers in the world, biggest hedge funds in the world. And he's a guy who has looked at powers, the major powers in the world, and how they've risen and how they've fallen. It's part of the reason he's so successful in business, because he was able to predict the market based on this. And so he looks at the stages of empire, for want of a better word, and where we're at and what the implications are for us with the changing order, going from what he calls a monopolar world to a multipolar world. And then you've got another very interesting character, Oliver Stone, a very authentic guy. I think a very honest guy. I don't agree with everything he says, but he has 2 documentaries about Ukraine that, to me, are quite shocking, because if what's in them has any truth, then there needs to be an openness and a discussion about what are we doing in these conflicts. I'll link his two videos as well. But he's also, he served in Vietnam. He's got a Bronze Star and a Purple Heart. So he's another American patriot who's very critical of what's going on with these conflicts. And so I've listened to these very interesting, respectful, articulate people, intelligent people, who aren't sort of just tribal. You know, if you really want to get somebody to disagree with Russia or hate Ukrainians or whatever, then you've got to pick people from that side. You know, the Russians are not going to speak highly of what the US is doing. And the US is not going to speak highly of what the Russians are doing. And the Ukrainians are not going to speak highly of what the Russians are doing. The Israelis are going to say everything they're doing is right and everything that's happening in Gaza is wrong. Because they've all got their own traumas. They've got their own generational traumas. They've got their own tribalism. And sometimes they're so blinded by it that they cannot see what right from wrong. They've lost complete sense of the navigating of what is right or wrong, or where to find what is right or wrong. And so I guess the next question is, what's really going on then? What's really going on with these conflicts that seem to be bubbling up? And I think when you really look into it, it's pretty clear that the source of the major conflicts that are going on today in the world, that source is the fact that the US is beginning to lose its position as the number one power. That's where it's all really coming from. And if that wasn't the case, even if these conflicts were being agitated by other things, I think there would be resolutions, the resolving of the issues and the coming together of people would be much easier. And if there was conflict, it would be at a much lower level. But the US is the number one superpower in the world, and it's beginning to lose that position, and it knows it. And so it's fighting back. And then you may wonder, how did it get into that position in the first place? Well, you had, if you listen to Ray Dalio, before the US it was the UK, before the UK it was the Dutch. Post Second World War, the US became the dominant power. It took Europe underneath its wing and said, we'll protect you, we'll protect the seas. It built up a huge military, built up huge economic might, the dollar, the number one currency in the world. It got involved in control and protection of resources, materials, oil, gas around the world, trade routes, and made friends with countries that would help them protect those areas. It's used its PR machine through movies, television series, media, basically to spread a message about what America is, its morals, its identity, its beliefs, to create a world order. And that world order, to push that in other countries and say, you can't just be independent, you've got to be like us. Push its products, push its services, push its identity into other countries. And that's all about retaining its position as the monopolar. But unfortunately, that's just like what Ray will tell you, no country can last. No country can sustain that indefinitely. And so one of the things that I've been acutely aware of as a product designer is that for decades, companies in the West have been trying to find ways to squeeze more juice out of the orange. In other words, to make things and make them cheaper and make more profit. And one of the solutions they came up with was to just make everything in China. And just look at the products you've got in your house. Even a product that says made in a car, made in America, made in Britain, you'll find half the components inside are made in China, especially the plastic moldings, electronic parts, all sorts. And so we sacrificed our resilience. We gave away all of our knowledge to China to make a quick buck, so that our shareholders and executives and the corporate people could make more money. And that has done is made our economies less resilient, made our people less resilient, because we don't make stuff locally. It's put loads of people out of manufacturing jobs, and they've moved into probably working in the service sector and other places. It's really made people in the West, in the UK and America, feel richer, but actually made them poorer. Because they have higher mortgages, higher debts. They work longer hours. Two people in a family now would have to work as opposed to maybe one a few decades ago. And so it's brought in a lot of anxiety and stress. You look at the number one monopolar country in the world, the US. Just look at its healthcare system. They don't have free healthcare for their own citizens. And simple things like holiday entitlement, all the basics of life, are just not up to scratch for a number one power in the world. And so you're in this situation where China and the Chinese are thinking, we were a second tier supplier making all the components and they had all the control, and we were just paying us for these components, and we had to accept it, and that was it, and we needed them for all our products and to sell our products. To now moving to become a number one tier supplier. What does that mean? Making the car as well as the components, the branding, everything. And I think there was a naivety on the part of the West that, just like they did with Japan, these people will never be able to make things properly. We're the best country in the world. We make the best products. And of course, you've seen with Japan and now you see with China. China is making the most incredible products. In fact, I would suggest that it's likely, unless the US and the West introduce massive tariffs in China, they'll wipe out the complete car industry. All the major brands will be gone or bought up by the Chinese. Car brands that are a part of the identity of countries. VW, Mercedes, BMW, GM. And so the US feels threatened that what it gave away in order to make a quick buck is now making them vulnerable to losing their position as the number one power in the world. And of course, you have countries starting to come together in the global south. African countries, Eastern European, Russia, China, and even the Gulf states, all starting to say, hey, we'll start working together. We'll call ourselves BRICS. Maybe we'll have our own central bank. We'll start putting money and loaning people money and doing all the financial things that the West has done to encourage global business and trade. We'll will build massive trade routes. That's what the Chinese are doing. The Road and Belt Initiative, the biggest, I think, expenditure in infrastructure ever in the history of the world. So they can have trade routes that they can send their products around the world with. And it kind of starts to leave the US out in the cold. Top of that, they want their own currency. They want a new global currency. They don't want a global currency that's vulnerable to the morals and views of the owner of the currency, to say, okay, we're not allowing you to trade in this, and we're going to take all your money away because we disagree with you. They want a currency that's backed by gold, so that it is much more reliable currency that people can have confidence in. And very soon they're going to launch that, I'm pretty certain. They're already starting to trade in their local currencies together. So that's a major, major red flag for the US, when they're used to being the ones in the number one position. And so it's no surprise at all that you see conflict in the Red Sea. A major trade route for goods and services all around the world. It's no surprise that Israel, which is really in many ways a proxy of the US and heavily funded by the US, is there helping to protect the interests of the US in an area full of resources, especially oil. Oil that can boom or bust economies, could take down the US economy. And so the really interesting thing with the conflict between Gaza and Israel is that shortly before that horrific event occurred, a tragic event occurred where Israelis were murdered and killed, there was a thing called the Abraham Accords. And the Abraham Accords had been boiling away since the time of Trump. And this idea, this partnership was Israel, Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, America, all kind of agreeing some things. Israel, Gulf states, Saudi Arabia coming together, recognizing each other, different religions starting to build economic links. US getting much stronger contractual arrangements on oil so that their currency is still used, the petrodollar, and that they can have more favorable prices. That they can be the ones in charge there. And then, of course, Saudi Arabia getting, nuclear protection from the US. Their military might, just like Europe, underneath the wing of the US. But they're sitting right next to Iran. And Iran wasn't having any of it. And is it no surprise that lots of the media speculate that Iran were helping other groups, and that those groups were getting training and weaponry, and that those groups would totally do something dastardly that would totally trigger highly traumatized Israel, people who suffered so much in the past through the World War and so on, who really have an identity about where they are and where they live and their religion, to just poke them in the eye. And then the reaction, the crazy reaction of the Israelis to go out and do dastardly things to innocent people in Gaza. And then the Abraham Accords are just torn up, gone. Because none of these Muslim nations could possibly continue after what has occurred in Gaza. Their people wouldn't stand for it. And so you also then have Russia and China in the background wanting to have more control in these areas. China getting most of its oil from Iran, most of Iran's oil going to China. Big strategic interest. And then Russia out in the cold. Russia, America, sanctions, feeding the Ukrainians with money to try and disrupt and reduce the military power of Russia. And of course, I'm a monopolar country. They're a threat. But it has had the reverse effect. Instead, Russia has now partnered with China, selling its oil and gas to China, forming much stronger partnership. Russia with loads of natural resources, feeding a manufacturing economy in China. It's partnership made in heaven. Really pushing the whole idea of BRICS and getting countries to come in. While the US reputation, moral reputation, is being totally trashed. And then you look at the Ukraine situation. And you say, okay, well, what about the Ukraine situation? Well, NATO. NATO is really another name for US monopolar. It's getting all of the military in the world to be under the umbrella of the US. That's just my view. And so they expand and expand and expand right up to the borders of Russia. And of course, they don't really like Russia because heritage, Americans in the US, they're people who have created this amazing country as immigrants coming from all sorts of horrific and terrible things, famines, wars, racism, discrimination, trying to create this world, the US, this dream world, with all its morals, and then saying to every other country in the world, you must abide by our morals. This is our vision of the world. We want everyone to be like us, eat like us, talk like us, listen to music like ours. But also with a sort of imperialist taint that they've got from the UK and France. We will be the ones in charge, and you will do what we tell you. And the global south and China and Russia, they're not interested in that. Russia can't be tamed, and especially when you have this heritage of the Cold War between these countries. So really, America, its strategic plan was to push NATO and get all the countries around Russia into NATO. Isolate Russia. Deplete Russia. Reduce its ability to do anything. And then use a proxy country, which is Ukraine, to basically fight the war on their behalf. So no American sons or daughters have to really die at all. And they can just feed weaponry in and replenish it through their political and their corporate military hardware system. Huge new contracts to replace all the hardware. And it sounds a little bit unbelievable, but if America wasn't so obsessed with being a monopolar power, I believe that all of these conflicts would probably have been much reduced, or they would have been a diplomatic solution. Ukraine would have become an independent country. There'd been a backing off with respect to trying to push them to join NATO. And so you can see that that's really where these root causes of these problems are. And if you want to really get a good perspective on the Ukraine scenario, just look at those 2 videos from Oliver Stone that I've posted down here. Ukraine on Fire is one of them. And they really go through the history of how America was involving itself in very, very deep and intimate ways within that country's political system, long before this conflict even started. I'm talking about the Ukrainian conflict even started. And it's shocking. Is it true? Well, I can't find anybody on the internet who's willing to properly scrutinize what Oliver Stone's documentaries and challenge him. I'd love to see it. I'd love to see the BBC run his documentaries and then have a big debate afterwards. to really work out what is, can this be true or not true? Because if it is true, it's damning for the US. And it's that they're posted, so you can listen to them yourself and put comments on and tell me what you think. And so going back to this whole idea of our government and our military leadership and our politicians sort of putting out the message, we might want to do conscription. What do you think? I would say that a country like America, trying to retain its position as the monopolar power, would not float my boat when it comes to going to wars. That is not a desperate situation. War is a last resort. But also, I don't think the American people really want this. I think the American people are not interested very much in the rest of the world. Just like most countries, they're interested in their own country, their own infrastructure, their own healthcare system, their own economy. So I don't think the people of America really are that interested in what's going on with this whole monopolar situation. I think that's an embedded pain body that's within the political system of America. But also, we're not multiple tribes anymore in the world. When we were on an island and we took all its resources and we looked at the other island and thought, well, we need theirs, we just got on our boats, went over and attacked them. And then we took the other island and two islands became one. For good or for bad, tribalism, survival mode was very important. But we need to be in thriving mode rather than surviving mode as a modern society, because we've kind of mastered the survival. We know how to grow food. We know how to create environments where people can have decent healthcare and food and warmth and everything else. We don't really do it very well, but we can do it very well. But also, we're just one tribe now. The world has become a tiny place because of information flow, because of technology, because of education. We all know we're brothers and sisters really all over the world. It's not as easy to target somebody of a different race or an ethnicity and just say, they need to be exterminated. Because the eyes of the world are watching. Just look at what's been happening with charge of genocide from South Africa and Israel for what they've been doing in Gaza. You can't get away with just killing all your enemies and acting in vengeful and angry ways. You can't do it. I mean, you can physically do it, but you won't be able to get away with it morally. You'll start to suffer when it comes to your reputation. And that's exactly what's happening to the US at the moment. Its reputation is being totally trashed. I don't think they even notice it, to be honest, the leadership in the US. They're so caught up in this story they're telling themselves. They've almost shut it out. But the rest of the world and the global south, of course, are feeding off this. And that's one of the things that's pushing these countries together. To have their, competing currency, to have a trading bloc that gives them the option of excluding or not being dependent on the US. And so the more America does, the more it tries to push staying as number one, the more harm it's doing to itself. And also, not just harm, the more it risks a spark that ignites a serious regional war or even a world war. And if you look through history, odd things have occurred that have caused catastrophe when it comes to wars. So America really, and the UK, instead of saying we need to conscript people, and I believe that they'll struggle, I think there'll be a major backlash. They need to be saying we need to really sit round the table with these other countries. We need to eat humble pie, come together and say this is now a multipolar world. This is one tribe and it's multipolar. We've got to be more thriving than surviving. We've got to be diplomatic. we've got to realize that war now, in this new world order, war will destroy us all. And war will lead to more war. That's really what the US has to do. And the only way that the US can do that, and the UK and Europe, is if we, the public, get much more active about the voting process, about the election process. That we basically wake up and use our vote. As I said before in other videos, we're ants. We use our votes as ants in that huge ant colony that has so much power. And we, as human beings, are the embodiment of this. There are trillions of cells in your body, trillions of bacteria in your stomach. To be alive, to be here now for me, depends on tiny, tiny things all working together. So it's not impossible for us as human beings, the millions of us, to really influence the political system. Get ourselves informed, which is partly what I'm trying to express here. Look at these wars and see what's really going on. And then, without the vitriol, without the hatred, without the tribalism, without trying to say they're the evil ones, it's not going to work. America, Israel, Palestine, Russia, China, all these countries have to come together. They have to come together and be that be that multipolar solution. Otherwise, it can't work, and it will lead to real trauma and pain and suffering for the world, which we can just avoid. But I strongly feel that unless we, the public, ourselves individually, start to really take an active role in deciding how we vote in an election, that really is the only meaningful piece of power, tiny piece of power that each one of us has. And you'll see from my previous video about the Gaza-Israeli conflict. It's so easy for us to do. It's so easy for us to find out who our elected representative is, to ask them really fundamental questions about their views on major things. And I would say wars are number one. The conflicts that we get, that our countries get involved in. To ask them what they're going to do. And then to take that information and use it to decide how you will vote. And that has the power to change everything. And they know it. They know this. That's why you're confused. That's why I'm confused. That's why I'm here trying to unconfuse myself or share a perspective to demonstrate that there's other things going on. Because the confusion leaves us thinking, I don't know what's going on. There's no point in voting. I'll just vote the way I did. That party is saying that we must attack those people over there. They must be right. There's constant manipulation going on to get you to vote in a certain way or to not vote. If you don't vote, it makes it so much easier for the political system because they only have to put out leaflets and propaganda to a small number of people. They need far less money for their campaigns if only 50% or 40% of the population vote. So really important that you actually vote, but voting for someone in that list of candidates that has a fundamental alignment with your values and is prepared to act on them. And then if we all do that, it's transformational. And the beauty about the internet, as I've said before, is it's very easy to find out who your member of parliament is and to write a letter and all that stuff. And then we can get to a place where someone isn't knocking on your door saying, "Where is your son? He's been conscripted into the military." To fight a forever war because we want to be the ones in charge and in control. And we're not willing to sit around a table and talk to other people. that's really no reason for anyone's son to be sent off. If you look at today, the shocking numbers of people that are dying in Ukraine, Russian men and Ukrainian men, brothers, people who probably have relatives that are the same, cultures that are not that different, and hundreds of thousands dead, probably conscripted in most cases, told you have to fight. For what? What are they fighting for? Fighting for something to do with we don't want to have NATO around us. We don't want to be part of NATO. We do want to be part of NATO. We don't want to be part of Europe. Is that a reason? Is that any reason for people en masse to be killed in probably pretty horrific ways, blown to pieces in many cases, shot? So that whole debate that started in the UK really made me think about what I want to understand and what I would do. And as it stands, I would not want to send anyone into a war from this country based on what I see is going on here. So thank you for listening. I hope it was interesting for you. I'm going to put all those links, as I say, in the video so you can actually look and investigate in more detail if you wish yourself, and get closer to a relative truth that makes a lot more sense for you. So thank you, and see you again.